My dad smashed my fingers with a hammer for asking why my sister gets steak and I get scraps. I was just 10 years old when my own father shattered my fingers with a hammer. Not because I misbehaved, but because I dared to ask for a piece of steak. That night, my childhood ended, and a quest for an impossible revenge began. One that would take 2 decades to deliver, and ultimately, bring them to their knees, Melanie. And even at 32, the memory of that night still makes my fingers ache with a phantom pain. I was just 10 years old when I dared to ask why my sister got juicy steak while I was handed cold, dry leftovers. That's when the hammer came down. Literally. The crack of my bones, the searing agony. My mother watching silently as my father laughed. Useless girls like you, he snarled, don't deserve fingers. It took me 2 decades, but I finally fed them a revenge so potent, they choked on it. If you're watching, I want to share how I took those broken fingers and transformed them into the power that ultimately brought them to their knees. Stick around, because this isn't just about survival. It's about reclaiming everything they tried to steal. Our home was a small faded blue house with peeling paint, tucked away in rural Pennsylvania. Isolation wasn't just a geographical fact. It was built into the very walls of our family. Our nearest neighbors were a quarter-mile down a dusty dirt road, far enough that screams could be swallowed by the distance, muffled by thick pine trees. It was the perfect stage for my father, Harold, a stocky man with perpetually oil-stained hands from his mechanic job, and a rigid, unbending belief system about how the world, and especially women, should operate. My mother, Dorothy, was a thin woman with perpetually worried eyes. She moved through our house like a phantom, her presence almost indistinguishable from her absence. She'd always defer to my father, always reinforcing his authority. She wasn't overtly cruel, no, but her silence, her absolute compliance, made her an accomplice, just as responsible for the horrors that unfolded within those walls. And her rare smiles? Her gentle touches? Those were reserved exclusively for my sister, Amanda. Amanda was 2 years younger than me, but she might as well have lived on a different planet, orbiting a son of my parents' affection I was never allowed near. Amanda had these beautiful blonde curls that my mother would lovingly brush each morning, a ritual of affection I watched from a distance. My own brown hair? It was chopped short, deemed too much trouble. Amanda got new clothes for school. I wore hand-me-downs from our cousins. But it wasn't just the material things that screamed about our disparity. Amanda is delicate, my mother would declare, always excusing her from chores. She needs her energy for ballet. Meanwhile, I was scrubbing toilets, doing laundry, and helping prepare meals. Meals where I'd never get the best portions. By 8 years old, I could cook a full breakfast and clean the kitchen afterwards. Skills my sister was never even expected to learn, let alone master. I tried so desperately to earn their approval. In 4th grade, I brought home straight A's, even a special commendation from my science teacher for my volcano project. I remember placing that report card so carefully on my father's recliner, my heart thrumming with nervous excitement, just waiting for him to notice. When he finally came home, he barely glanced at it, grunted, and then just asked where dinner was. "Harold," my mother ventured quietly, "Melanie got all A's." He didn't even look up from his newspaper. "That's what she's supposed to do," he said dismissively. "Not like she has anything else taking up her time." That same year, Amanda brought home a C+ in math and was rewarded with ice cream. "At least she tried her best," my mother chirped. The message was deafeningly clear. My achievements were simply expected, completely unremarkable. My sister's mediocrity? That was cause for celebration. Soon, I started seeing these inequalities everywhere. Sunday dinners? Chicken breasts for my parents and Amanda. I got the wings, or worse, the back. New shoes would appear on Amanda's feet at the slightest scuff, while mine had to be practically falling apart before replacements were even considered. Christmas was a stark contrast. Thoughtful gifts for her, reflecting her interests, while I received practical items like socks or school supplies. This pattern continued relentlessly throughout elementary school. My father would ruffle Amanda's hair affectionately when he came home, but I was practically invisible. My mother would ask about Amanda's day at dinner. But mine? Never. And if I dared to interject with stories about school achievements or something interesting I'd learned, I'd instantly be cut off, "Don't interrupt," or the classic, "Nobody likes a show-off." By 5th grade, a desperate theory had formed in my young mind. Maybe, just maybe, if I excelled enough, if I was truly exceptional, they would finally see me. So, I threw myself into schoolwork with a renewed, almost frantic determination. I joined every free school activity I could find, volunteered for extra credit projects, stayed late to help teachers. I imagined them being proud of my initiative, my drive. Instead, they seemed utterly annoyed by the inconvenience of picking me up later. Why do you always need to be different? My mother snapped one evening when I asked to stay for a science club meeting. You think you're so special with all these extra activities. Just come home and do your chores like you're supposed to. That confusion I felt? It slowly curdled into a deep, burning resentment. I watched Amanda glide off to expensive dance classes while my free school activities were actively discouraged. I saw my father on his rare days off take Amanda fishing, teaching her to bait a hook and cast a line, a bonding ritual I was never privy to. Instead, I stayed home, helping my mother with endless housework. When I was 10, the unfairness became too much to bear. I started to question it out loud. Why does Amanda get to go to Sarah's birthday party, but I can't go to Jessica's? I asked one Saturday morning. My mother sighed, a theatrical, put-upon sigh, as if I just asked the most exhausting question in the world. Because Amanda was invited specially, and those girls are good influences. We don't know Jessica's family well enough. But I showed you the invitation. I persisted, my voice trembling. And Jessica is in advanced reading with me. Enough, Melanie, my father interjected, his voice like a slammed door. Your mother said no. Go clean the bathroom instead of arguing. Every time I dared to question the disparity, the responses grew harsher. Stop being jealous of your sister. Life isn't fair. Get used to it. Or the ultimate dismissal. When you contribute something valuable to this family, maybe you'll deserve more. But it was a question about food that finally pushed my father over the edge, fracturing my life irrevocably. It was a Thursday evening in October when my world quite literally broke. My father had gotten a promotion at the auto shop, and my mother, for once, had prepared a special dinner to celebrate. The kitchen smelled incredible as I set the table, my stomach growling in anticipation. It had been a long day at school, and I'd skipped lunch to finish a book report, foolishly hoping to share my good grade with them over dinner. Then, my mother started serving. Thick, juicy steaks landed on everyone's plates. Everyone's, that is, except mine. For me? A small, dry, crumbling portion of leftover meatloaf from 2 nights before. Baked potatoes, laden with butter and sour cream for them. Plain rice for me. Even the vegetables were divided unequally. Fresh green beans for the privileged, canned corn for the unwanted. I stared at my plate, then at Amanda's, where a perfectly cooked steak oozed pink juices. This inequality wasn't new, not really, but something about this particular night, maybe the gnawing hunger, maybe the culmination of years of differential treatment, gave me a flicker of courage I rarely displayed. Mom, I asked, my voice barely a whisper, trying desperately to keep it steady. Why does Amanda get steak while I get leftovers? The entire table fell silent. My father paused mid-chew, his knife and fork suspended over his plate. My mother's hand froze while passing the salt to Amanda. The air thickened, heavy with unspoken tension. What did you say? My father's voice was quiet, dangerously so. Always more terrifying than his yelling. I swallowed hard, but something propelled me forward. I just wondered why we're not all having steak for your celebration. My mother jumped in, her voice falsely cheerful, brittle. Melanie, don't be ungrateful. There wasn't enough steak for everyone, and Amanda needs her protein for dance class tomorrow. But I have a math test, I countered, confusion etched in my voice. And I'm bigger than her. Shouldn't I need more food? My father set down his silverware with deliberate, chilling slowness. Your sister contributes to this family's reputation with her performances. What do you contribute except complaints? His tone should have warned me to back down, to shrink, but 10 years of injustice had forged a rare, fragile moment of courage. I get good grades and do most of the chores, I blurted out. I just don't understand why that's not enough to get the same food. You know your place in this family, my mother snapped, uncharacteristically harsh. Stop asking questions you already know the answer to. The response stung, but something in me, something desperate, couldn't stop. But what is my place? Why is it different from Amanda's? My father's face mottled red, a vein throbbing at his temple. Amanda smirked slightly, cutting another piece of her steak with obvious, chilling satisfaction. The basement door stood open behind my father. I could see his toolbox on the workbench from where he'd been making repairs earlier. "I work hard all day to put food on this table," he said, his voice steadily rising. "And you have the audacity to question how we distribute it?" "I just want to understand," I whispered, already regretting my persistence, yet utterly unable to back down. "By the way, if you're still with me, still holding your breath for what happens next, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. More stories of survival and strength, just like this one, are coming your way. Your support means the world." Now, back to that fateful night. What happened next unfolded so fast, I barely had time to process it. My father shot up, his chair scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. He stormed to his toolbox, yanked out a hammer, and returned to the table in 3 long, terrifying strides. Before I could even flinch, he grabbed my right hand, stretching it flat against the table. "You want to understand?" he growled, his eyes feral. "Here's something to help you understand your place." The hammer came down hard on my fingers. I heard the crack before I felt the pain. A sickening sound of bones giving way under metal. Then the pain hit. White, hot, blinding. I screamed, trying to pull my hand away, but his grip was iron. He brought the hammer down a second time on my already shattered fingers. "Useless girls don't need fingers," he laughed, a terrible sound devoid of all humor. "Trash gets scraps." My mother didn't intervene. She didn't rush to my aid, didn't express a flicker of horror. Instead, she spat out, "Maybe this will teach you to be grateful for what you're given." Amanda's eyes were wide, yes, a mixture of shock, but also something else. Something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. She just kept eating her steak as I cradled my mangled hand, blood dripping onto my untouched plate of cold leftovers. "Clean up your mess," my father ordered, returning to his seat and cutting another piece of steak as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. "And stop that noise. You brought this on yourself with your questions." Somehow, through the haze of agony, I stumbled to the bathroom, running cold water over my swollen, misshapen fingers. No one came. No one checked on me. No one offered ice or bandages. A hospital visit? Unthinkable, despite the obvious broken bones. I wrapped toilet paper around my throbbing hand, biting my lip to stifle my cries. When I finally emerged, dinner had concluded as if by magic. My mother was washing dishes. My father was watching television. Amanda was doing homework at the kitchen table. "Your plate is still on the table," my mother said, without even looking at me. "Eat your food and clean up after yourself." I couldn't use my right hand, but no accommodations were made. I awkwardly ate a few bites of cold food with my left hand, tears silently streaming down my face. No one noticed. Or if they did, no one cared. That night, lying in bed, my throbbing hand crudely wrapped in tissues and toilet paper, a chilling clarity settled over me. I was utterly alone in a house full of people who were supposed to love me. That knowledge seeped into my bones, mingling with the physical pain. It was a realization that would shape every single decision I made from that point forward. The next morning, my hand had swollen to twice its normal size. My fingers bent at unnatural angles, discolored in hideous shades of purple and blue. Movement sent shooting pains up my arm. I couldn't stop the tears that sprang to my eyes as I tried to get dressed. "Stop being dramatic," my mother snapped when she saw me struggling. "Here." She tossed me an elastic bandage from the medicine cabinet. "Wrap it up and get ready for school. You're not staying home for something you brought on yourself." With my left hand, I awkwardly wound the bandage around my injured fingers, whimpering when I pulled it too tight. The bandage did little to alleviate the pain or correct the obvious deformity, but it concealed the worst of the bruising. At school, writing was nearly impossible. I attempted to hold my pencil with my left hand, producing shaky, barely legible letters. My teacher, Mrs. Thompson, noticed my struggle and asked what had happened. "I caught my hand in the door," I lied, reciting the explanation my mother had instructed me to give. "It's just bruised." Mrs. Thompson looked skeptical, but she accepted the explanation. "Maybe you should see the nurse," she suggested. "My mom said it's fine," I insisted, terrified of what would happen if medical professionals got involved. The physical pain was excruciating, a constant, dull throb. But the changes at home proved even more insidious, more painful. My father began referring to me as Lefty, a cruel daily reminder of what he had done. "How's Lefty doing with her homework?" he'd ask mockingly at dinner. "Is Lefty managing to be useful around the house?" My mother, predictably, doubled down on her expectations, assigning me the same chores despite my injury. "Figure it out," she'd say when I struggled to fold laundry or wash dishes one-handed. "This is your lesson in gratitude." My fingers never healed properly. Without medical attention, the bones knit back together incorrectly, leaving me with permanently crooked fingers on my right hand and significantly reduced dexterity. Writing remained difficult, affecting my schoolwork. My once perfect penmanship became a struggle, and my grades began to slip as I couldn't complete assignments as quickly or neatly as before. "See," my father would sneer when report cards came home with B's instead of A's. "Even with two good hands, you were barely worth keeping around. Now what good are you?" Amanda quickly learned to use the incident to her advantage. If I didn't complete one of her chores or dared to question anything, she'd threaten, "Do you want me to tell Dad you're complaining again? I think he still has his hammer." My parents began using the incident as justification for further mistreatment. "Useless girls don't need new clothes," my father would say when I outgrew my jeans. "Useless girls don't need to go on field trips," my mother would echo, refusing to sign permission slips. The verbal abuse escalated, always circling back to my uselessness and the hammer incident as proof of my inferior status. "Remember when you thought you deserved the same as your sister?" my father would reminisce, almost fondly. "Did that hammer knock some sense into you, or do you need another reminder?" I learned to make myself invisible. I spoke only when spoken to, taking up as little space as possible. I completed my chores silently, ate whatever scraps I was given without question, and suppressed any natural inclination to ask for fairness or equality. My survival depended on becoming a ghost in my own home. My academic performance, once my only source of pride, continued to deteriorate. Writing lengthy essays was physically painful, and my confidence had been so damaged that participating in class discussions became terrifying. Teachers who had once praised my intelligence now expressed concern about my lack of effort and attitude problem. "See what happens when you get too big for your britches," my mother said after a parent-teacher conference discussing my declining grades. "You never were as smart as you thought." Amanda, meanwhile, was flourishing. Her mediocre grades were celebrated, her dance recitals attended by extended family, her every minor accomplishment treated as extraordinary. The contrast between our treatments became even more pronounced. "Amanda is going places," my father would announce proudly. "She'll make something of herself." The unspoken implication was always clear. I would not. As college brochures began arriving for Amanda, discussions of my future centered around a single, chilling path. "You'll stay here after graduation," my mother announced one evening, as if stating an obvious fact. "Someone needs to help around the house as we get older. And it's not like you have other prospects." "Amanda has talent," my father added, unnecessarily. "She needs education to develop it. You just need to learn to be useful." I nodded silently, but internally, my resolve hardened into steel. I would not stay. I could not stay. But escape would require planning and resources that seemed utterly impossible to acquire under their watchful eyes. I began taking small, calculated steps towards independence. Volunteering for after-school programs that offered small stipends. Saving every single dollar by hiding money inside feminine hygiene product wrappers, knowing my father would never touch them. I researched GED programs, just in case I needed to leave before graduating. I collected information on shelters and assistance programs, carefully covering my tracks by deleting browser histories and using school computers whenever I could. My secret journal, once a mere record of abuse, evolved. It became a blueprint for escape, filled with budgets, timelines, and contingency plans. The fantasy of leaving transformed into a concrete goal, with practical, actionable steps. Then, disaster struck. While I was at school, my mother conducted one of her periodic room searches and discovered my journal, hidden in the hollowed-out textbook. When I arrived home, she and my father were waiting. The journal lay open on the kitchen table between them, its pages of pain and plans exposed. "So we're abusive, are we?" my father asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "We provide a roof over your head, food in your stomach, clothes on your back, and this is how you repay us?" By writing lies about us. They're not lies, I whispered, finding a raw shred of courage from somewhere deep inside. The backhanded slap caught me off guard, splitting my lip and sending me stumbling backward. Everything we have done has been for your own good, my mother insisted, her eyes cold. To teach you your place in the world. And this is how you thank us. The punishment was swift and comprehensive. My bedroom door was removed, since you can't be trusted with privacy. My meager possessions were sorted through, anything deemed unnecessary, discarded. The small amount of money I had painstakingly saved? Confiscated. I was withdrawn from all school activities, driven to and from school by my mother, eliminating any opportunity for independent movement. My isolation became nearly complete. My only contacts outside the family were during school hours, and even those were monitored through frequent check-ins with teachers. A heavy blanket of depression settled over me, muffling my thoughts, draining what little energy I had left. There were days I considered ending my life, seeing no other escape from the prison my home had become. I would stand in the bathroom, staring at the bottle of sleeping pills in the medicine cabinet, calculating how many it would take to ensure I never woke up. What saved me was a small, unexpected kindness. Our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, saw me weeding the garden one Saturday. She noticed my still deformed hand and approached the fence that separated our properties. "You're working hard," she observed, her voice genuinely kind. "Would you like some lemonade when you finish?" My parents were shopping with Amanda. One of the rare times I was left alone outside the house. I glanced up, surprised by the friendly overture. "That would be nice," I answered cautiously. The hour I spent on Mrs. Wilson's porch, drinking tart homemade lemonade and listening to her stories about growing up during the Great Depression, rekindled something I had nearly lost. Here was someone who saw me as a person worthy of kindness and conversation, not as a burden or a servant. "You remind me of myself at your age," she told me. "Quiet, but watching everything. Planning." Her words felt like a recognition of something essential about me that even I had started to forget. That conversation became a profound turning point. I realized I needed to be smarter about my plans, more careful, more patient. I resumed my escape preparations with renewed determination, but with significantly greater caution. I created a new hiding place for my savings, inside a heating vent in the bathroom. I maintained a facade of complete submission at home, while quietly, meticulously preparing for the day I would leave forever. As my senior year approached, I focused on a single unwavering goal: survival until graduation. Whatever came after, that would be my choice, not theirs. The discovery of my new secret savings was, perhaps, inevitable in a household where privacy was non-existent. 3 months before graduation, Amanda was searching the bathroom for a missing earring and noticed the slightly loose heating vent. Her discovery of over $800, painstakingly saved over 2 years, was immediately reported to my parents. My father was waiting when I returned from school. The money was spread across the kitchen table like evidence at a trial. "Stealing from the family now?" he accused, his face flushed with anger. "It's money I earned," I replied, my voice remarkably steady despite the panic rising in my chest. "From tutoring and shelving books at the library." "Everything in this house belongs to me," he countered, his voice venomous. "Including you and any money you bring in." "What were you planning to do with this?" "Run away." The terrifying accuracy of his guess startled me into silence, which he correctly interpreted as confirmation. "After everything we've done for you," my mother interjected, her voice thick with feigned hurt. "This is how you repay us? By planning to abandon your family responsibilities." "What responsibilities?" I asked, a rare moment of direct defiant challenge. "To be your servant forever? To always be less than Amanda?" My father stood so quickly his chair toppled backward. "You ungrateful little trash. We give you a home when we could have thrown you out years ago. We feed you when you contribute nothing." "Trash gets scraps," my mother spat, repeating the cruel mantra that had defined my existence for years. Amanda leaned against the doorframe, watching the confrontation with undisguised pleasure. "I always knew you were plotting something," she sneered. "You think you're so smart, but you're really just pathetic." Something broke inside me in that moment, but not in the way they expected. Instead of crumbling under their cruelty, I felt a strange calm settle over me, a terrifying clarity that had eluded me for years. "Keep the money," I said quietly. It doesn't matter anymore. My apparent surrender seemed to satisfy them. My father pocketed the cash, my mother resumed preparing dinner, and Amanda smirked triumphantly before returning to her room. They believed they had broken me, completely crushed my final hope of escape. They were wrong. That night, alone in my doorless bedroom, I made a decision. I wouldn't run away half-prepared, with insufficient resources. Instead, I would bide my time, appearing completely defeated, while secretly formulating a better plan. Graduation was still possible, and with it, my 18th birthday and legal freedom from their control. Over the next few weeks, I projected an image of total compliance and resignation. I performed my chores without complaint, accepted whatever scraps they provided without question, and never mentioned the future. I even stopped spending extra time at school, coming directly home each day as if I had fully accepted my fate. Finally learned your lesson, Lefty? My father asked one evening, apparently pleased by my submission. I nodded silently, eyes downcast, while internally calculating exactly how many days remained until graduation. My new strategy was simpler, but required perfect timing. Rather than accumulating money they could discover and confiscate, I arranged everything in advance. I spoke privately with Mr. Pearson, my English teacher, explaining as much of my situation as I dared. I need to leave immediately after graduation, I told him. Is there any chance you know of somewhere I could stay temporarily, just until I find work? His concern was evident, but he respected my boundaries. My sister runs a women's shelter in Pittsburgh, he said after some consideration. I can call her, see if they have space. You'd have resources there, people who could help you get on your feet. With that cornerstone in place, the rest of my plan clicked. I arranged for my few important documents, birth certificate, social security card, to be stored in my locker at school. I packed a small bag with essentials and hid it in a seldom-used storage closet at school. I purchased a bus ticket to Pittsburgh using the library computer, scheduling it for the evening of graduation. The morning of graduation arrived with an air of tension. My parents had made it clear they wouldn't be attending the ceremony, a decision I secretly celebrated. Watching you get a diploma you don't deserve isn't worth closing the shop early, my father had announced the previous evening. And someone needs to prepare Amanda for her dance recital next week, my mother added. I nodded obediently, concealing my immense relief. Their absence would make my escape infinitely easier. I left for school that morning with nothing unusual in my appearance or behavior, offering the same quiet goodbye I always did. My mother barely looked up from helping Amanda with her hair. My father had already left for work. At school, I changed into my graduation gown in the bathroom, tucking my regular clothes into my prepared bag. The ceremony passed in a blur. My name was called with no cheers from the audience, no proud parents taking photos. Mr. Pearson caught my eye as I crossed the stage, giving me an encouraging nod. As other students reunited with families for celebrations, I slipped away to the bus station, 3 blocks from the school. The ticket counter attendant barely glanced at me as I exchanged my reservation for an actual ticket. I boarded the bus to Pittsburgh at 6:30, claiming a window seat near the back. As the bus pulled away from the station, I allowed myself to look back at the town that had been my prison for 18 years. No one had followed me. No one had noticed my absence yet. The realization was both profoundly liberating and acutely painful. A final brutal confirmation of how little I mattered to the people who should have loved me most. Only when the town disappeared from view did I finally permit myself to cry. Silent tears of relief, of grief, and of tentative blossoming hope. The bus carried me toward an uncertain, but gloriously self-determined, future. The women's shelter in Pittsburgh was a revelation. A place where kindness was the default, rather than a rare exception. The director, Susan, Mr. Pearson's sister, welcomed me without judgment, showing me to a small but private room with a bed, a dresser, and most importantly, a door that locked from the inside. The bathroom is shared, she explained, but you'll have this space to yourself for as long as you need it, up to 3 months, typically, while residents get on their feet. 3 months. It seemed simultaneously generous and terrifyingly brief. I had escaped, yes, but with nothing except a high school diploma, permanently deformed fingers, and a lifetime of being told I was worthless. The first few weeks were overwhelming. The shelter provided basic necessities and connections to social services, but the process of building a life from scratch proved daunting. I applied for entry-level jobs at every business within walking distance, facing rejection after rejection. My awkward handwriting made applications difficult, and my lack of experience or references limited my options. Eventually, I secured 2 part-time positions. Morning shifts at a local bakery, washing dishes and cleaning, and evening work at a convenience store stocking shelves. The hours were long, the pay minimal, but the independence? It was intoxicating. For the first time, my earnings were my own, not subject to confiscation or control. At the shelter, I met Zoe, a 23-year-old woman escaping an abusive relationship. We formed a cautious friendship, bonding over late-night cups of tea in the communal kitchen. "You never talk about your family," she observed one evening. "But your hand, those scars, they tell part of the story." I flexed my crooked fingers automatically. A habit developed when uncomfortable. "My father broke them with a hammer when I was 10, I admitted, the first time I had spoken the truth aloud to anyone. "Because I asked why my sister got steak while I got leftovers." Zoe didn't respond with horror or pity, reactions I had feared. Instead, she simply nodded. "My ex broke my ribs because I asked if I could visit my mother," she said. Some people can't stand any challenge to their control. That simple acknowledgement, the recognition that what had happened to me was objectively wrong rather than deserved, cracked something open inside me. I began to speak more freely about my experiences. First with Zoe, then with Susan, and eventually with a counselor at the community mental health center. As my 3-month stay at the shelter neared its end, Zoe proposed a solution to our shared housing dilemma. "I found a 2-bedroom apartment in Lawrenceville," she said. "It's not fancy, but the rent is manageable if we split it. Want to be roommates?" The apartment was indeed basic. Worn carpets, outdated appliances, thin walls. But it had locks on the doors, equal-sized bedrooms, and no one monitoring my food intake or movements. It felt like a palace. With stable housing secured, I turned my attention to education. The community college offered evening classes that would work around my employment schedule, and I discovered financial aid options for low-income students. I enrolled in basic courses, including a creative writing class that rekindled my love of words. Professor Winters, the writing instructor, pulled me aside after reading my first assignment. "Your perspective is unique," she said. "Raw, honest, unflinching. Have you considered pursuing writing more seriously?" I shook my head, still unable to imagine a future beyond my past. "Well, you should," she insisted, echoing Mr. Pearson's words from years before. "There's a scholarship for promising writers. The deadline is next month. I'd be happy to help you apply." The scholarship application required a personal essay. After much deliberation, I wrote about my hands, about how the physical disability from childhood abuse had shaped my relationship with writing, making it simultaneously more difficult and more essential. I described learning to write with my left hand, the pain and determination involved, and how words became my refuge when everything else was taken away. 2 months later, I received notification. I had won. It provided enough funding to reduce my work hours and focus more on education. For the first time, my injury, the visible evidence of my father's cruelty, had become a source of opportunity rather than a limitation. Around this time, I received news from my hometown through an unexpected source. Mrs. Wilson, my elderly neighbor, had gotten my address from Mr. Pearson and sent a letter. Amanda had left for college with significant financial support from our parents. My father's business was struggling due to a new auto shop opening nearby. My mother had been telling people I had run off with a bad crowd to explain my absence. Most significantly, Mrs. Wilson mentioned that my parents seemed to be aging rapidly, with my father developing heart problems and my mother complaining of arthritis that made housework difficult. "They seem to expect your sister to come home and help during breaks," she wrote, "but from what I gather, she has other plans." I felt a complex mixture of emotions reading this news. No satisfaction in their struggles, but certainly no sympathy either. They had made their choices, created the family dynamic that guaranteed their daughter would flee at the first opportunity and never look back. Over the next 2 years, I established a stability I had never known. My grades were excellent. I moved from the convenience store to a better-paying administrative position at a local insurance office, and I began publishing short essays in the college literary magazine. Therapy helped me process my childhood trauma, though the nightmares and reflexive flinching at sudden movements persisted. Through it all, I kept journals, continuing the practice that had sustained me during my darkest times. But these new journals were different. They focused on recovery and growth, rather than just documenting abuse. I began to see patterns in my writing, themes that resonated with readers, and a voice that was distinctly my own. The idea for the memoir began as a suggestion from my therapist. Writing your story might help you process it more fully, she proposed. Not just for yourself, but potentially for others who have experienced similar trauma. Initially, I resisted. Publishing my experiences felt too exposing, too vulnerable. But the idea took root, growing stronger as I continued my education and developed confidence in my writing abilities. By my third year in Pittsburgh, I had begun drafting chapters, transforming raw journal entries into a cohesive narrative. The process was painful but cathartic, requiring me to revisit memories I had tried to suppress. I wrote about the hammer, the unequal meals, the stolen money, the systematic undermining of my self-worth. I wrote about escape, about rebuilding, about learning to trust and be trusted. I wrote with unflinching honesty, but also with growing compassion, both for my past self and for the broken people who had raised me. When the manuscript was complete, I submitted it to small publishing houses that specialized in memoirs and social issues. The third submission resulted in an acceptance letter and a modest advance. Broken, a memoir of survival and reclamation, would be published the following spring. As the publication date approached, I vacillated between immense pride and sheer terror. My private pain would become public, my family's cruelty exposed. I had used pseudonyms for everyone except myself, but anyone from my hometown would recognize the characters and situations immediately. A week before the book's release, I received another letter from Mrs. Wilson. My father had suffered a major heart attack. He was expected to recover but would require significant care. My mother was overwhelmed, and Amanda had made it clear she would not be interrupting her graduate studies to return home and help. "They are asking about you," Mrs. Wilson wrote, "wondering if anyone knows how to reach you." I sat with that letter for hours, examining my feelings. They had broken more than my fingers. They had broken my trust, my sense of safety, my childhood. But I had rebuilt myself without them, stronger in the broken places. I did not respond to their indirect inquiry. Instead, I sent Mrs. Wilson an advanced copy of my book with a note. "Thank you for the lemonade and hope when I needed both most desperately." The memoir was about to change everything, though not in ways any of us could fully anticipate. Broken, a memoir of survival and reclamation, was released with little fanfare initially. The publisher had arranged a small book tour, mostly local bookstores and community centers in Pittsburgh and surrounding areas. I had modest expectations, hoping the book might reach others who had experienced similar abuse and show them that escape and healing were possible. What I hadn't anticipated was the book's impact beyond that specific audience. A prominent reviewer described it as unflinching and essential reading, exposing the quiet brutality that can exist behind closed doors. A radio host who had survived child abuse championed it on her program. A university professor added it to her Psychology of Trauma course reading list. Sales began to climb steadily, then exponentially when a national morning show featured a segment on child abuse that mentioned my memoir as recommended reading. Within 2 months, the book entered the New York Times bestseller list, catapulting my private pain into very public discourse. The first indication that news had reached my hometown came via email from Mr. Pearson. "Your parents are telling everyone the book is fiction, that you have always been mentally unstable and prone to exaggeration," he wrote. "But those of us who saw your hand, who noticed how you flinched when someone raised their voice, we know the truth." I had been braced for denial, but the reality of it still stung. My mother had apparently told the local church group that I had broken my own fingers in a bid for attention, then blamed my father. My father was portraying himself as the victim of a money-hungry daughter trying to profit from sensationalized lies. Amanda had joined their defense, giving interviews to local newspapers, describing me as always jealous, and making up stories to explain why she wasn't as successful or talented. Their reaction, painful as it was, confirmed everything I had written. Their concern was not for the daughter they had hurt, but for their own reputations and narratives. Then something truly unexpected happened. Other residents of our small town began coming forward with corroborating stories. My third-grade teacher recalled how I had returned from a weekend with fingerprint bruises on my arms but refused to explain them. A former classmate remembered how I was never allowed to attend birthday parties or school events. The school nurse documented her concerns about my consistently underweight status and the suspicious explanation for my broken fingers. As these supporting accounts emerged, The tide of local opinion began to shift. Community members who had initially accepted my parents' denials started questioning the narrative they had presented for years. Former friends distanced themselves. Church members stopped visiting. Customers sought automotive services elsewhere. The social consequences were significant. The legal consequences, however, were minimal. The statute of limitations had expired for child abuse charges, and I had no interest in pursuing a protracted legal battle. My goal had never been punishment, but truth-telling. Taking back the narrative that had been imposed on me. 6 months after the book's publication, I received a cease and desist letter from a lawyer representing my parents, demanding I retract defamatory statements and threatening a lawsuit if I refused. My publisher's legal team responded firmly, pointing out that truth is an absolute defense against defamation claims and offering to provide medical experts who could testify that my hand injuries were consistent with hammer strikes rather than an accident. No lawsuit materialized. Instead, a different letter arrived. This one was from Amanda. Unlike our parents' legal threats, her approach was emotional manipulation. "You have destroyed our family with your exaggerations and one-sided account," she wrote. "Dad is too stressed to work full-time now. Mom cries constantly, and everyone treats us like pariahs. I hope you are satisfied with your revenge." I sat with her letter for days, examining my feelings. Was satisfaction what I felt? Had revenge been my primary motivation? The answer was more complex than a simple yes or no. The book had not been conceived as revenge, but as reclamation, a way to own my story rather than having it defined by those who had hurt me. Yet, I couldn't deny the element of justice in watching truth dismantle carefully constructed facades. My parents had controlled the narrative for 18 years. Now, I was controlling it. I did not respond to Amanda directly. Instead, I continued the work that had grown out of the book's success. I established a foundation to provide scholarships for young people escaping abusive homes, funding education that could help them build independent lives. I spoke at conferences on child abuse prevention and intervention. I advocated for policy changes to better protect vulnerable children. Through this work, I met Jordan, a social worker who specialized in family trauma. Our professional relationship gradually evolved into friendship, then cautiously into romance. His patience with my trust issues, his respect for my boundaries, and his genuine interest in my thoughts rather than just my story, created a foundation unlike any relationship I had known. "You talk about your book as taking control of your narrative," he observed one evening as we walked along the river. "But the most powerful thing about it is how it has helped others reclaim their stories too." He was right. Weekly emails arrived from readers who recognized their own experiences in my words, who found courage to leave abusive situations or seek help after reading about my journey. These connections became the most meaningful outcome of publishing my painful past. 3 years after the book's release, Mrs. Wilson wrote again. My father had suffered another, more serious heart attack. My mother was struggling to care for him alone, as Amanda remained firmly established in her own life several states away, visiting rarely and briefly. "They are asking for you," Mrs. Wilson wrote. "Your father especially. He says he has things he needs to say to you." The request presented a dilemma. I had no obligation to provide the closure they sought, to facilitate deathbed apologies that might ease their consciences without healing my wounds. Yet, part of me was curious about what my father might say when confronted with his mortality. After much consideration and discussion with my therapist, I decided to visit, not for their sake, but for my own. Jordan offered to accompany me, a support I gratefully accepted. The house looked smaller than I remembered, faded and neglected. My mother answered the door, visibly aged beyond her years, her once sharp eyes now uncertain and clouded. "You came," she said simply, stepping aside to let us enter. My father lay in a hospital bed in what had once been the living room, oxygen tubes in his nose, skin ashen against white sheets. His once intimidating presence had diminished dramatically, his physical decline stripping away the power he had wielded so cruelly. He turned his head slightly as I approached, recognition flickering in his eyes. "Melanie," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I stood at the foot of his bed, not close enough to touch, Jordan's steady presence a grounding force beside me. "I am here," I said, my voice steadier than I had expected. "Your book," he began, then paused for breath. "Not all lies." It was as close to an admission as I was likely to get. An acknowledgement that fell far short of the apology part of me had still hoped for, despite everything. No, I agreed. Not lies. We did what we thought was right. My mother interjected from behind me. Parents do the best they can. I turned to face her. No. You did what was easiest for you. What maintained your preferred family structure, with Amanda at the center and me in service to everyone else. That was not your best. She flinched as if I had raised a hand to her, unprepared for direct confrontation. I didn't come for apologies or explanations, I continued, looking between them. I came to show myself that I am not afraid anymore. That I can stand in this house, in your presence, and remain whole and strong. You no longer have power over me. My father closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with visible effort. The hammer, he said, his gaze dropping to my right hand, where the evidence of his cruelty remained permanently etched in crooked fingers and surgical scars from the reconstructive surgery I had finally obtained as an adult. Yes, I said simply. The hammer. No further explanation was offered or needed. We all knew what had happened in that kitchen years ago. We all knew it had been deliberate, cruel, and intended to teach a lesson about my place in the family hierarchy. I stayed only 20 minutes, speaking little, mainly observing the diminished reality of the people who had loomed so large in my nightmares. As Jordan and I prepared to leave, my mother pressed a small box into my hands. Your things, she explained. What was left after you ran away? I accepted the box without comment, though ran away was hardly an accurate description of my carefully planned escape at legal adulthood. Outside, in the rental car, I opened the box to find childhood mementos I had forgotten existed. A participation ribbon from a third-grade spelling bee, a small stone I had treasured for its perfect roundness, a tarnished necklace gifted by Mrs. Wilson one Christmas. Small treasures deemed worthless by my family, but that had once meant something to a lonely child. Are you okay? Jordan asked as we drove away from the house, the box secure in my lap. I considered the question carefully. Yes, I said finally. Better than okay. Free. My father died 3 weeks later. I did not attend the funeral. Instead, I sent a simple flower arrangement with no card, not as forgiveness, but as acknowledgement that this chapter was truly closed. The foundation work expanded, growing to include advocacy for mandatory reporting laws and better training for teachers to recognize signs of abuse. I completed a master's degree in social work, specializing in childhood trauma. Jordan and I married in a small ceremony focused on celebrating chosen family rather than biological ties. Most importantly, I continued writing. Not just about trauma, but about healing, about building meaningful lives after significant harm, about the possibility of joy, even with permanent scars. My crooked fingers typed more slowly than most, but the words they produced resonated with authenticity and hard-won wisdom. The broken child became a whole adult, not despite the trauma, but through the process of surviving and transcending it. The hammer that was meant to keep me in my place instead became the catalyst for finding my true place in the world, far from those who sought to diminish me. If you've been touched by this story, or recognize elements of your own experience in it, please know that healing is possible. That worth is inherent rather than earned. And that your story deserves to be told. I would genuinely love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in my place? Or, has anyone else found writing or creative expression helpful in processing difficult experiences? How have you defined success and healing on your own terms? Please like and subscribe if this resonated with you, and share it with anyone who might need to hear that broken does not mean destroyed. Thank you for witnessing my journey. Remember, your scars tell the story of your survival, not your defeat.